we'll keep them separate because you put the two of them together, it's like a high school science experiment. You don't know what's going to happen. So Lenny will follow Steve, and Lenny was in a unique position too, and has really a proximity to John's career as well, and through some perspectives offered by some owners. George Krikorian comes to mind, particularly, that I know Lenny is particularly friendly with. But Len will join us. April Mayberry and horses that once hands, and of course, just it's just impossible to believe that a weekend ago, John and Dottie and the Searings were with April and looking at the 2-year-olds that were going to come John's way. So April will talk about how important John has been to her life and the Mayberries overall. Brian Beach, one of two jock agents that will visit today. Ron Anderson as well, but Brian, unique circumstance that sees Brian having booked John's last win and the ride on Westwood, and Brian, the trainers have certain jock agents that they rely on in a lot of ways. Brian, one of them. Jay Pridman will join us top of hour 2. Jay's career really overlaps with Jay's as well, and Jay will offer his experiences covering John, and you didn't take much to move from from being a pundit and a turf writer to being a friend of John and Dottie's. So Jay, Ron Anderson is mentioned, and I know Ron also. We had Gary Young. On I guess was it Monday? It must have been Monday, right? And his letting us know that Randy Winnick had passed, and Randy, a good friend, a lifelong friend, offer thoughts and an appreciation of Randy in addition to John. Jay Hovde as well. And if you didn't see Jay's piece at Blood Horse, Haskins pieces and Steve had the just a heartbreaking duty of essentially writing the DRF obit, and Steve, somebody else whose career overlaps John's, and covering John Sheriff's. And later in hour 3, we've actually got I've got 2 I think unique potential perspectives. Mac McBride from Del Mar, and Mac, and I've also reached out to Greg Gilchrist. And what's unique about Mac and Greg when it comes to John Sheriff's, they're all Vietnam veterans, and Mac and Greg in particular have that shared experience. and Mac will join us at about 11:15 Eastern. And I'm hoping to hear back from Greg. I was late getting to Greg Gilchrist, so hopefully this morning. Of course, he's out on the West Coast, and I reached out to George Krikorian as well. I don't know how many times did John and I talk about Hollywood Story and the Krikorian, the outlandish success of that family, and as John Sheriffs was really hitting stride in the late 90s and then into the aughts. George Krikorian, a big part of it. So I'm hoping George will join us. And I'm hoping for Lee Searing as well this morning. Mike Smith sends apologies. He's traveling, and it is going to be in the air till 3 Eastern. So probably get Mike tomorrow. And there's some other, obviously, there's others that that would lend wonderful perspective and tribute and homage to John that are just not up to it yet, because the rawness of this is really just you just having people yanked out of your life without any warning, and that's what that would that's the part of this that just makes it impossible. Greg Gilchrist will join us, actually back to back with Mac McBride. So Greg Gilchrist, who is one of not just these days a terrific bloodstock agent in buying horses for clients, but one of the great untapped resources, frankly. Gilchrist, an absolute gem that everybody loves. So I'm glad he can join us. Steve Askin is going to come first, and we'll. I hate that we call upon Steve for this kind of thing, but he's got the unique to capture. I think Steve. I think back to the Bobby Frankel tribute show we did, and you were the first person I thought of to kind of start this this appreciation of John.
I appreciate that, Steve. You hate to come on, and like you said, under these kind of circumstances, especially when it comes this unexpectedly. So I tell you what's crazy about it. The same week we lost to Fleet Alex, and the Fleet Alex could have been a Triple Crown winner if it wasn't for John Sheriffs, who beat him in the Derby.
That was an odd confluence. Agreed. How did you first? What was your first interaction with John? When did he come? Kind of come into your field of opportunity.
Well, mostly, he's in California, so I didn't have a lot of early contact with him. I had met him a few times when I went out to California to cover the Breeders' Cup, and realized immediately that he was unlike anybody I've ever spoken to. And then I got to know him obviously a lot better when he came to the Derby with Giacomo, and came to Churchill a few times with Zenyatta, and even I actually got to know him a lot when he came. Actually, people forget that he came to New York.
Saratoga.
He came to, he really had a barn at Belmont.
That's true.
And he was in a totally different environment. I mean, just to see John stable, and his main stable was at Belmont. Hollywood Park was about to be torn down, and I think John was a student of history, and he just decided that he was going to try Belmont Park, and he was it was unbelievable. I mean, when you think of the fact that when he came there, and like I said, he was a student of history, and he loved and he appreciated all the greats, the great trainers, the great horses that came before him. And after he moved, they put him in John Nehru's old barn, and he was like so thrilled to be in Nehru's barn, somebody that he idolized. That this was what John was like. This is what kind of a historian he was. Is that when I went to see him at Belmont, he made it a point, went around to find out what stall Dr. Fager was in, and he built a shrine to Dr. Fager outside the horse's stall, that stall where he was in. He had photos of Dr. Fager. He had a copy of his past performances, charts, everything pasted on the stall that used to belong to Dr. Fager, and wouldn't put a horse in there. So, and he got such a kick out of, John Nehru had invented the tartan track. Do you remember the old,
Sure.
Calder originally? And, it was named Tartan Track because of Tartan Stable. John had invented that surface, and the little walking ring outside the barn, he put the tartan surface on there. And John brushed away all the dirt that was out there, and under the dirt, it was still there. It was like, it was like seeing, an old masterpiece painting when you paint over the masterpieces, to smuggle them out of Europe. And you find out that there's a masterpiece under there. That was John. You could faintly see it, but you can definitely see that it was the tartan surface under there. And he got such a kick out of that. So I think he really enjoyed his stay at Belmont. He just absorbing all the history of New York and Belmont Park. And like I said, just finding out that he was in the same barn as Dr. Fager.
Talk a little about talk about portion of conversation certainly is a sheriff's trainee, but that not that there weren't horsemen that shared their horses with the public, but it feels like the way John utilized Zenyatta kind of kicked off a series of unique opportunity for the public to get in touch with equine stars, right? I mean, because then American Pharaoh, and then Kenny McPeak with Swiss Skydiver first, and then Torpedo Anna. It feels like what John did with Zenyatta kind of kicked off a very positive trend in the game.
Definitely, we really had never seen that. We're dealing with certain trainers, and you ask a question, they answer, and that's basically it. And you don't really get close to the horses. But with John connected so well with people's feelings, and he knew how much Zenyatta meant to so many people, and he just allowed more access to her than probably any superstar in memory. And I don't think any. I can assure you that nobody ever got closer to a superstar than they did with Zenyatta. And I remember, first of all, there was he stood at the barn once at Churchill Downs and started telling me how he could not believe how people react to her, how they break into tears. He talked about a woman who had, I forgot what problem she had, but she couldn't walk. She was in a wheelchair. and she had fallen in love with Zenyatta, and she came to the barn, and John gave her complete access to the horse, and she just fell in love with Zenyatta to such a degree that the next time he saw her, she was up walking around. I'm not saying it was Zenyatta that did it, but she had no answer for it. And there was a woman that contacted me. Her name was Abigail Anderson, and she was a school teacher from Montreal. And she was really shaken at the time by this death of this teacher, who was a much-loved teacher from Montreal, and she loved to dance. And she got so much joy in her final days from watching the video of Zenyatta performing her, traditional quote dance that everybody thought that's what they attributed her to, dancing. So she had asked, basically on behalf of the English teaching community in Quebec, if there was any way that Zenyatta could somehow run in the Breeders' Cup that was coming up in this woman's name. Their name was Marjorie, to run in Marjorie's name. And, I mentioned it to John. I just told him, I said, look, I don't know what you could possibly do. As it turns out, when Zenyatta ran at Churchill Downs that year in the Breeders' Cup Classic, she went to the post carrying this Marjorie's name in the brow band of her halter. So, who's going to do that? And then Zenyatta gets beat, and it's agonizing. And most trainers would be absolutely devastated by it. It was just so heartbreaking to see her get beat. And I was down at the track with John, and you can see he was shaken up, but he tried to remain in high spirits. So anyway, the next day, he had Zenyatta out in the grassy area, at Churchill Downs, behind the barns along Longfield Avenue, all morning and all afternoon, with people lining up all day, all morning, all afternoon, lined up to pose for pictures with her and feed her carrots. It was just a long line of everybody on the backstretch, just coming to the barn and forming a line. And the next person would come up and hug her and kiss her and feed her carrots. And somebody would take a picture. I took a picture of some of the women. Ann Moss would take pictures of them. And then the people would come. They would stop their cars on Longfield Avenue and come out, and the police came, asked them to move their cars, and nobody would. And finally, the police gave up, and they left. And they would line up along the fence, and John had them bring Zenyatta up to the fence, and she would lower her head, and they would reach under the fence. The little kids would reach under the fence to pet her and just to touch her, and the grown-ups would be feeding her apples in there. One woman came with an inscribed cake, and everybody was helping her pass it over the fence. I mean, who else is going to do that? And even after when Zenyatta was heading to Lane's End, when she flew back from California, it was at night. It was like below sub-freezing. I mean, it was like 20 degrees out, and it was ice on the ground. And he had Zenyatta parade around the sales ring at Keeneland, and they were lined up like 9, 10 deep, reaching over, and he would bring her over, right to the edge so people could reach up and get one last, pet, one last touch of her before she went off to Lane's End. And they waited for hours because the plane got delayed. But, it's just hard to explain him. He had such a totally different outlook, of life. And one of my favorite musicals of all time is Man of La Mancha, with the story of Don Quixote and Cervantes. And there was a line in there where Cervantes says that madness is to see life as it is and not as it should be. And John saw life as it should be. And that's why I think so many people admired him, because, Don Quixote was considered mad, for his quest to restore chivalry and honor in the world. And there's a line in the play that goes, remember, where the Padre in there says, "There goes either the maddest wise man or the wisest madman in the world." And he adds, "The cure may it not be worse than a disease. And I wish the whole world was as mad as John, because you're listening to him, and sometimes you have no idea what he's saying. And I got to tell you, in fact, let me just pull it out here. Right? Let me just see if I can get this. One of the last times I contacted him was last year. I was asking him about changing riders on Baeza from Flavian Pratt back to Hector Berrios for the Jim Dandy. And, I foolishly was expecting a simple answer, but John didn't believe in simple answers. So the best example I can give is to just read you his text, his response to that question. And if you want to know who John is, this is it. So just bear with me on this. He says, I just basically was asking him why the rider changed to Berrios. So this is his response. I changed riders for more rein length, less leg, and was careful to always finish well past the wire. A longer rein means it's okay to relax. Picking up the reins means I want your attention. Keeping your leg on the horse keeps him alert. Always collected keeps tension in the muscles. Morning gallops have to teach when it's okay to relax. In years gone by, the raiders took the knot out of the rein and they knew his exercise was over. Touched their neck. When a rider wants to take a horse off the cow when cutting competition, he touches the horse's neck. Okay, it's over. Riders use their legs to engage the hind end. ... Collection. More harder work for the horse. Hector is an excellent rider and has more knowledge of Baeza and how Baeza responds. Now, the last sentence was all I needed to know. That's all I wanted to know. Was one. All he had to do was say Hector is an excellent rider and has more knowledge of Baeza. Fine, that's great. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. I had no clue what everything else meant. But the last sentence, like I said, was all he needed, and much, and even his last sentence was more than most trainers would say. But when John's brainwaves got going, he gave you a lot more than you bargained for. And I look at this quote, and I'll always keep this on my phone, by the way, because
sure.
this was John. It's just. One of the other texts I had texted him last year because I was doing a story on Puka, the dam and her
sure.
amazing history.
And I was just
texting him, and was that
Paul Pompa?
Yeah, for sure. That was an unbelievable story. So I texted him. We were talking, and I just mentioned about the amazing story of Puka. And he responds by asking me if for some time I would look into Jerome Park. He said it was a great story and there were so few photos of it. I said, oh, okay. I don't know what that has to do with Puka at all. Most people never even heard of Jerome Park. I don't know where that came from. But so basically you never expect the expected with John. It's just it's incredible. Also, from another, just a personal story, again, probably one of the greatest moments of my career and most surreal moments was, I was covering Zenyatta's classic victory in 2009. And afterwards, I'm coming down with John and Dottie and Ann Moss and Jerry Moss or so. I come down and I get invited to dinner with them. Yeah, I'm going back to the hotel to write my story, a 3,500 word story, and they invite me out to that. I said, no, that's okay. And oh no, John insisted. No, you got to come out. We invited you. So I go before going to the restaurant, and we're there I'm there with John and Dottie and Ann and Jerry Moss and Mike Smith and his girlfriend and David and Gordo. I mean, I'm sitting there. I'm at the head of the table saying, what am I doing here? And they've got Zenyatta's. They have Zenyatta's saddle cloth with the number on it and everything, and they're wrapping it around their shoulders and their head like a scarf, and they're fooling around with it, and everybody's having a great time. But before we headed to the restaurant, I left my car at John's house, and he brought me in and just showed me his treasure chest of history and memorabilia, and showed me that he would wake up each morning before heading to the barn, because he had a long drive, because he lived right near Santa Anita, but he trained out of Hollywood Park. And he went over to his computer and he turned his computer on, and there on his computer is Zenyatta live in her stall. So every morning before leaving, because he had like an hour's drive, every morning before leaving, he'd sit there all morning and watch her, just to see how she was doing and make sure she was okay. And here I am at his house at, I don't know what time it was at night, 8 o'clock at night, whatever, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, watching Zenyatta, in the quiet and the darkness of her stall with no one around. And he's showing me all of, like I said, all of his history in there. I mean, that was like one of the most unbelievable nights I could remember. When you see her in her store like that, and you realize that just, a couple of hours earlier, Santa Anita was like rocking. I mean, the loudest ovation and outpouring of emotion I'd ever seen at that point, at a racetrack. But, seeing them at dinner, draping themselves with Zenyatta's saddle towel. And John is looking at everything with that familiar demure smile on his face, like he's not going to do something like that, but he's going to really get a kick out of everybody else doing it. So that was a night I'll certainly never forget. Just an amazing person, and I'm sure you've spoke to him many times, and like I said, his words could be cryptic, but to me they were sheer genius.
Well, and that's one of the things.
Passion for people, he just thought
very much.
Yeah, for him to just fade away so quietly like that, it's just, what do you say? It's just, I'll tell you one thing. Somewhere, if you believe in it, he's up there with John Nehru and all those other guys talking history and talking horses.
Sure.
Steve, and they will understand every word he says.
That's right. It won't be as cryptic to Nehru and Elliot and Preston Birch and all the other brilliant horsemen.
That will be heaven to John, having everybody understand.
Well, he the times we sat with him, particularly at Santa Anita, he gave our audience an hour almost every time. He would come by, and sometimes I'd arrange it ahead of time. Other times I just catch him on the fly, and my own curiosity, just anything I asked, he would launch into explanation. I know so many times would get fabulous responses to John's visits for that reason, as you lay out. So, Steve, I know you're heading out. I've got Lenny actually standing by, and
good, yeah. Lenny's got plenty of stories too.
Well, and it occurs to me, you mentioned the final career start. The three of us stood there on the track apron there and watched that in the gloaming that day. So not lost on me, the three of us together now. Steve Askin, as always, thank you.
I would say it was my pleasure, but certainly wish you didn't have to do it.
Exactly. Steve Askin, everybody. And if you haven't seen Steve's piece yet, secretariat.com. Lenny Shulman has also got a little bit of a timetable as well. And Lenny, as Steve was talking, and Brian brought me the note, Lenny online, it popped in my head that there and watched hold off Zenyatta that night. I mean, you want to talk about a historic moment in the game's history. Certainly John authored no shortage of those.
Yeah. Well, what also sticks out, I'm sure Steve touched on this, but if he didn't, just the class of John the next day, when he was out grazing the mare, and hundreds of fans, lining up, and just him with one of the worst beats you'll ever have. But there he was, just sharing her like nothing had ever happened, and that's more a tribute than what he did, with training a horse on the racetrack, just to have that kind of class and compassion for her fans, and what had to be a really difficult time for him.
Agreed. And I mentioned just as recently as last April, the Santa Anita Derby, when Baeza fell short and John felt that he needed to win to get to Derby, and he was for him he was inconsolable. I walked with him down out of the boxes, to the track, and I kept saying, John, it'll be fun. You're going to get in. He's going to have points. He's going to get it. And, oh no, they adjusted the points based on the number of starters, and it's going to keep us out. And he was not happy because he was one of the kinds of horsemen and had owners that they didn't need to get to the Derby just to get to the Derby. He only wanted to go if he had a horse he thought could win.
He was a different kind of cat, and that's what made him so special. He was not like any other trainer that pops to mind. Maybe if you gave me time, but he was an old hippie. He just thought about things differently. And I remember when I would first see him, I was way before I had a job in the industry. I was in my self-sufficient, barely living screenwriting career, but I was at Hollywood Park every Saturday, and he had this lucky spot, on the first floor, the first floor over the ground, and there was this outlay, kind of this curved, little outlay up there that was right over the winner's circle, and that was his lucky spot. He would watch the races from there. It was my lucky spot also. So I would watch the races from there, and I never bothered him. I'd say hello, but it was just so funny, It was just you could just tell he was a different kind of guy, But people obviously, the first line of the epitaph is Zenyatta, but back then, in the 90s, turn of the century, John had a lot of great clients and a lot of great horses. Those 505 horses for Marshall Napier. I mean, Manistique was Zenyatta before Zenyatta was Zenyatta.
Yep.
She was this statuesque, incredible race mare, that he guided through the years. And, George Krikorian's fillies, Hollywood Story and Star, and, Marty Wygott's fillies. I mean, he excuse me, he was one of the ones, and I consider that kind of the golden age of California, and he was right there with all of them. So it went a lot deeper than just the mare that everybody's going to associate him with. But the one funny thing I'll share was when he got the better of Bob Baffert. I think it must have been Midnight Loot, must have been around the same time that Zenyatta was, and Baffert would always, tease him that, she's not that big. Midnight Lute's bigger than she is. I don't know what everybody's talking about, how big she is and this and that. Well, it went on so long that they finally got the tape measure out. And they measured Midnight Lute, and they measured Zenyatta. And Bob had to eat the tape measure after that because Zenyatta was bigger than Midnight Lute. And I remember the year, that year that John had her at Churchill. He was going to run in the two-turn Philly race, Derby weekend. And there was that year where it just rained every day, and John ended up scratching her. But I would stand with Baffert at the Gap every morning, and when Zenyatta would come around, Baffert would just look at her and go, "Oh, there's the moose." There's the moose. Oh, it's the moose. I think it really hurt him that he lost that. I don't even think it was a wager, but he lost the argument about who was taller.
That, and you mentioned that occasion where everything was pointing to her starting. That would have been in 2008, and I mentioned this either yesterday or last week with Hammer, and it must have been Thursday. I'm going to say it was Thursday of that week, and we stood by the car, and the trunk of he brought me over to his car and opened the trunk, and he was showing me a book, and I'm not even sure because we exchanged antiquities a number of times, and he told me, "I'm going to scratch her. This track's not going to be in the right condition. I don't want to bring her back on a sloppy track," and it made perfect sense. And she ended up, I think she ended up in either the what was it then, the Milady or the Vanity?
Yeah.
One of those at Hollywood, and. But I can remember sitting, on the bumper of the car, and I think we were still a 4 o'clock show, so I had mornings free, and I got to hang out, all morning long that way, and it just was a pleasure. There's any topic, and there was something to talk to John about, and it didn't have to be horse related, games history in particular, but just there's so many moments you treasure.
If anything, and if possible, his training job with her was actually probably underestimated, because for everybody who wanted to detract from her because she was running on synthetic tracks, she hated those tracks. She loathed that track at Del Mar, absolutely hated it, and still managed to win, every race that she ran there. I don't think there's any doubt she would have. I don't know how you could be better, but if she was racing exclusively on dirt, I think she would have been better than even she was. So the training job to keep her winning on tracks that she really didn't care for is something that I think John's underestimated for. One other thing about Zenyatta I just want to mention, just covering her. I know Steve touched on this, just the team around her. They were all, I don't want to say hippies. They were all just such cool, mellow people. And I think it reflected, I think the mayor reflected that. And it goes back to when she was foaled. She was foaled by a guy named Don Robinson here in Kentucky at Winter Quarter Farm. And Don was an old hippie. Before Don followed his father into the horse business, he was traveling around California doing what people were doing in the 60s around California. And he was like that. And, John was like that. And Jerry Moss, who was the coolest dude in the room, no matter what room he was in, was like that. And Ann was like that. And what a pleasure to have a team like that, around. And you can't convince me that didn't rub off on the horse. So it was just such a pleasure to be around those folks. And again, it's a real difference. John just was different from other guys. Certainly other trainers. Or people in that business. They just weren't like that. People like him and Bobby were just, they were just cut from a different cloth. And it goes to what you just said. Bobby was another one who, didn't want to talk about horses when you were there. You don't want to talk about anything else but horses, and could talk about anything else but horses. And, those kind of guys, those well-rounded guys, you don't see that all the time. But, John, he's just a pleasure all the time. I don't know how anybody, you'll not find anybody to say a bad word about him.
Lenny Shulman joining us on the heels of Steve Haskins' visit as we pay tribute to John Sheriffs. April Mayberry is going to join us, and Brian Beach, Jay Privman, Steve Anderson, Ron Anderson, Jay Hovde, Mac McBride, and Greg Gilchrist, actually back-to-back, Lenny, and you boosted a Gilchrist visit to talk, the three of them, John and Mac and Greg, all Vietnam vets.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was just talking to Greg yesterday, which is always a pleasure. And, he happened to bring up John, which is why I brought it up to you. But, I asked Greg to tell the story about, when John had his early training up in the hills in Reno or somewhere, because Greg always had fun with him about that. But that was another thing. These guys were all working farms when they were young and doing all the things and learning, from the ground up the way you're supposed to do it. And and that's something that Sam Shepard actually was another one who was working at Rex Ellsworth's farm when he was a teenager, and ended up being a horseman, along with the 83 other things that he was. But yeah, these guys learned it the right way, and guys like Greg and John are really true horsemen.
The fact that John kept producing despite turnover in amongst his owners, I think some people might have been surprised that John was 80. Right? I actually myself was a little surprised. I didn't think of him as that old.
Yeah, well, again, 25 years ago, you're absolutely right. I mean, John had a client list that was sterling, everybody that I mentioned earlier. But then, it happens. It happened to Lucas also. People get out of the business, they pass away, and all of a sudden you're sitting there one day, and where did all the good horses go? But John always seemed to, come up with one, and but that time period when he had, Marshall Mapey and George Krikorian and Marty Wygott and whoever else. I mean, that was a funnel with some great horses, and he knew what to do with them.
I've made the point when you mentioned 505, which he started with. They clearly, whether it was the horses themselves or their the way they wanted their horses to produce, John was a first out win early trainer, and then as he became a public trainer, he got to start putting his stamp on the horses, and letting them develop on their timing, and he became the absolute, picture of patience. Which just shows you how talented he was as a horseman.
Not that I want to say anything bad about those that are gone, but Marshall Mapey was was a tough guy. He was one of the guys I never got to interview for a story because he just didn't want to do it and let me know in no uncertain terms. And Marty Wygod, who I did get to know and did get to write about, was not the easiest man in the world to train for either. So again, that's a tribute to John. Is able to do it for everybody. So.
Lenny, I appreciate this, and this is going to be one of those that you when you say irreplaceable and one of a kind, it's really appropriate here.
Yeah, and best thoughts to Dottie also. I haven't talked to Dottie in a while, but just very sweet people, and it's just a shame. It is. Yeah, you're not going to find better ones than that. So, yeah. I appreciate you having me, and yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Lenny Shulman, folks, and we'll be talking to Lenny and Paul Volpone, I would think, in coming weeks about their Tom Durkin biography, which is going to be a smash hit. So that is in the offing. We had tentatively expected to talk to April Mayberry, but we've got Summer Mayberry instead, which Summer, I greatly appreciate it. And you can, there's any Mayberry can talk effusively, right, about the family's relationship with John.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, we had a great relationship with John. He was, part of our family, and we're all very, deeply saddened by his passing. And we had a lovely dinner 2 weeks ago. He was down here excited, for the upcoming babies. And we just were shocked. So, he's irreplaceable and just wonderful man, brilliant horse trainer. And so we had a relationship with him for probably close to 40 years, something like that. He was
right.
He was an assistant for my dad when our family first moved to California. I think it was, and so we were out there, and then just throughout the years, we always, there were some similarities between him and my father, and so we just admired each other's training methods, and kind of had the same philosophy with horses, the horse first philosophy, patience. So it's just a real shocker, like I said.
Well, and of course the Mayberry family, you and your sister, fourth generation, right?
Yes, mother.
And
my mother.
Yeah. Yep.
The three of us have our farm down here in Ocala, and quite a bit of early spring for some pretty nice horses to be in. To have such great people like John and Dottie, and of course our wonderful clients, and so
I know that your father and Brian Mayberry is Summer and April's father, and had a fabulous career, a very kind of a similar framework as John, right? I mean, just only enough horses that he could put his hands on, every day, and
That's right.
right, and a disproportionate percentage of stake winners. I think Sardula probably the most famous, right? And I think John was around for Sardula.
Yes. Well, he was training his own barn at that time.
Already by then?
Yeah, yes, he was training his own barn at that time. We had Sardula for the Mosses, and Dottie, was the Mosses stable manager.
Right.
And yeah, so we're all intertwined.
Exactly. And for those that follow Bloodstock, you see references to Mayberry Farm, and the parade summer of
Mhm.
of stars that you guys have had a hand in. I mean,
Yes.
we try to celebrate. We try to celebrate the people that I hate the term. I've been taught to try not to use the word breaking horses. The people
Right.
that start horses and
Early training.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And really, when it comes to John, handing off a horse to John, this is all organic and a unique. Really, as you said, you're all intertwined, and so philosophically and approach-wise,
Right.
John has to be. Not that other trainers haven't had success with horses that you guys develop, but
Right.
There's a particular, perfect connection, to putting one on the plane, out to John,
Right.
that he would pick up right wherever you guys had left off, whether it was,
Yeah, that's right. And there's a trust that goes into it. You have to trust each other, and and it's a very important part of a racehorse's beginning is how they're started. And so we like to think that we do a good job. But our main star. Well, we've had two main stars, but the one connected with John, of course, is the big girl, Zenyatta. So that was pretty amazing. And then the other horse we had was Flightline. So those two turned out pretty good, I think.
Pretty good. And then even I don't want to call Rich Strike a lesser light, but
well, Rich Strike always gets he always gets forgotten to be mentioned. Yeah, so that's the other grade one. We had quite a few for John Sadler, and
sure.
a lot. There's been quite a few good horses to come off our farm.
Yeah, to say the least. Well, and then as I'm inferring, sending them, putting them off to John, handing them off to John, and he, every indication. It's funny because I was with him days before he went out to see you guys, and he was talking about going to see the babies, and he you could see. I mean, he was gleeful about what was coming his way because he had been checking in. The horsemen get to Ocala regularly, and are checking on the development. And he said we've got some really nice 2-year-olds in the pipeline, and from that standpoint, it's really bittersweet that they'll they'll be developed elsewhere.
Yeah. He's he made racing a better industry, and hopefully with the new generation of trainers, they'll take some notes from his notebook.
Well, you can hope.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, Summer, I appreciate it, and extend thoughts as well to April and to Gene, and thank you for this. We'll look forward to seeing you at OBS March.
Oh, thank you very much.
Summer Maybury and Maybury Farm, that was a steady pipeline for John and the Mosses, and John worked for Brian Maybury, and I'm trying to remember well, Jay Privman's going to join us. Jay will remember who John worked for before Brian. Jay Privman, good morning.
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
This is one of those obligations that is in this particular case, it's really difficult to accept. I mean, just without warning, and one of those people that you'll just miss. You come to Clocker's Corner, Jay, and it'll the of the absent will tug at chart Barry Abrams. Certainly, every time I'm there, I'm looking for Barry. So, some thoughts from you?
Yeah, just a great loss. Like you said, it was unexpected. John's passing, and he was 80 years old, but he was a very young 80 years old in terms of the way he, thought, and he was obviously still very mentally sharp. He was very physically fit, and he was young in terms of just always having still to his last day the great curiosity about horses and life, and the thirst to learn. He had the most modern equipment when it came to cameras and glasses and shoes. So he was very very contemporary person. But in terms of racing, just a great loss. I was thinking yesterday, he kind of is an encapsulation of what you want the ideal trainer to be. Someone who always put their horses first and really did treat them all as individuals. Many say that they do, most don't, but he does, or did. It's hard to say these things in past tense. And did it the right way in terms of medication and medication violations, because there weren't any. It was just really what you'd ideally want. And one of the things that really is going to tick me off about all this is that he is certain to get into the Hall of Fame this year, as is Christophe Clement. And the only thing that they've done, unfortunately, since they were last on the ballot a year ago, is pass away. And it just burns me that neither of them got in while they were alive. And I just would implore anybody who votes for the Hall of Fame this year to look at the ballot, and if you see anybody on there, you'd go like, if that person passed away, I'd vote for them then, but I'm not now. Don't do that. I don't know what a guy like John Sheriffs could have done more during his career to get into the Hall of Fame than what he had already done. And I'm glad he'll get in this year, because he obviously, his name deserves to be in there, but he himself deserved to be there, as would have Christophe Clement. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen now.
I also will, in that conversation, will invoke Garrett Gomez, who he'd been inducted on the timing that he deserved. It may have actually been an important influence in his life. We've had these discussions, Jay, and particularly with you, because you covered and have a hand in the nomination process and so forth. The David Whiteley discussion, this gets into the numbers where people think somehow we've gotten to a place where earnings and volume is somehow the demarcation, and it's just bizarre. It should be not that it has to be the opposite. I mean, there is something to be said for for piling up the wins, but that's not a mark of a Hall of Fame career.
No, I mean, to me, the equation is what did you do with what you had? And you need to, and that to me tracks with what you're saying about looking. You can look at volume if you have a lot of volume, but you produce with that volume, like Todd Pletcher has done, or Chad Brown's not in the Hall of Fame yet, but he will be when he's eligible. People like that, Mark Cassie. They've produced with and Steve Asmussen, they've produced with volume, but you've got to also look at the people who have smaller strings by choice and produce at the same sort of strike rate, but they don't have the numbers to have the volume. John Sheriff's obviously comes to mind. Richard Mandela, who's in the Hall of Fame, would be, I think, an excellent example of that equation. And those types of people need to be rewarded. And to your point, Whiteley, who was on the ballot several times, and I think he's defaulted to the Historic Review Committee. So we'll see how that that plays out when he comes up for eligibility there. So yeah, it's a great loss, and the Hall of Fame thing will be a nice coda to his career, but I really wish he'd have been able to stand up there and take it all in.
Well, exactly. In terms of your covering and your interactions with John, Jay, and following his horses, and it's a very interesting career. Starting with the 505 program, and then taking on, as Lenny mentioned, really a glittering array. I mean, he very quickly attracted premium owners.
Yes, well, he had a pretty strong background prior to that. He'd worked on a couple of farms, and he'd worked for Bill Spar, so he'd been around the track, and then Mayberry, and so people knew him and knew how good he was, sort of what a horse whisperer he was, and he did well when he took over those 505 horses, and then just went from strength to strength with people like the Mosses and more recently the Searings, and always producing, in the Wygots, and always producing at the highest level in terms of Grade 1 wins, Breeders' Cup wins, and of course a Kentucky Derby with Giacomo.
Talk about writing stories and interacting with John, and maybe things you learned that or things that you would hear from him that were just uncommon, that just that were out of the ordinary for the kind of conversations turf writers have.
Well, what stands out to me is just the way, like I was saying a little bit ago, how he really did treat horses like individuals. He enjoyed tinkering with them and trying to figure out, made them tick, and would make them produce and perform, I should say, at a higher level. And he was kind of a barn rat. I mean, he was not somebody who would. I mean, he got there early and he stayed late. He just enjoyed being at the barn and being around the horses and observing them, and just trying to figure out, like, what can I tweak here to make this horse just a little bit better. I remember, for instance, one specific thing with Manastique, who was one of his first really good horses early on when he went out on his own, and she was just physically a giant of a mare, and she would be uncomfortable getting in the stalls of the starting gate because she was just so big. They would the metal would be touching her on either side because she was just so tall and so wide. And he got her to get used to going into the gate by piling up hay bales at the barn and walking her into them and through them to get her used to that claustrophobic sort of feeling of things.
Fabulous.
Right. I mean, you would do stuff like that when you think, like, how did he even think of this? But he did, and it worked. You know, that it was stuff like that you were just like, this guy is just on a different level in terms of his horse savantness, for lack of a better, for a better term. And he also, he really loved the history of the game. He would be, as you know, he'd be constantly like suggesting old periodicals for you to read, or if he came across something like, look at this new thing I got on eBay. He just loved. I mean, he loved that kind of stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mentioned her. We exchanged. I would send him a book. He would send me a picture of Morris Park.
Right.
It was just crazy. His curiosity on that front, just amazing. And I'm looking, Jay. I'm looking at the list of stake winners of John's, and what really speaks to his abilities. Long, short, turf, dirt, it did not matter. He would adapt.
Yeah, he could train anything. Yep.
Right? I mean,
absolutely.
Here's a La Brea winner. Here's the Eddie Reed and Hollywood Derby, Aftermarket and Beyond.
Aftermarket.
And when you look at these horses of his, and beyond the obvious, Life is Sweet, Zenyatta, etc. Manastique, you mentioned. Hollywood Story is my favorite.
Right.
You look at some of those horses, and you really realize in somebody else's hands, they would not have been what they wouldn't have reached the level of accomplishment that they did.
Agreed. And I mean, that's because he really would take the time with them, and they were noted for, Zenyatta probably most notably, for long careers at the top level, but multiple years campaigns, and being at that level and staying at that level, like Life is Sweet, for instance, Manastique, those horses like that. I mean, he was just really, really good. And like you were just alluding to, he could train any kind of horse, sprinter, router, grass, dirt. Just it didn't matter. He wasn't a one-trick pony.
And you look, it's funny, I'm looking at, and this would be an interesting exercise. I think it's fair to say, was Express Train really the first big hit he had for the Searings? One of the first.
Honor AP, maybe? I'm thinking off the top of my head here. So if I'm
no, that makes sense. But Express Train was a horse I don't think that got good until he was 5.
Right. But in terms of for the Searings, Honor AP was, I think, maybe from a crop or two before Express Train. I'd have to look, but it's close. But Express Train had stayed on the track for a long time. I mean, through the end of last year even, top level, and came back. That was the other thing. He got horses to come back after lengthy layoffs and still perform well. Like I said, he just really did treat them as individuals. And the other sort of tell, for lack of a better description, of how he treated horses as an individual, Steve, and you'll remember this too. And if you go back and listen to your interviews with him, you'll pick up on this. I think he never referred to a horse as, that filly or that colt did this. They always, every instance, referred to the horse by its name. Always. Everything. Like if you ask him, how's Zenyatta? He would, well, Zenyatta this, Zenyatta this, Giacomo this, Giacomo. It was never like he or the colt. It was always the horse's name. Every time. I'm telling you, if you go back and listen to your interviews with him, you'll note that.
I love that. I love that. And there's an interesting little thing I just am noticing. express train still in front of me, and he had this extent at a certain point after the big cap win in 22. He didn't win again, but a lot of board hits, and there's one little thing that he did right at the end. He ran him in the Pat O'Brien. He cut him back.
Yeah.
To change it up. He knew little things like that. He knew to try to, lift his head and get him, back involved and to throw a curve. I can think of, there's a few horsemen I can think of that have done things that, especially with an older horse, to try to get them interested again. I mean, if their desire is seemingly waning, throw something fresh at them. They like a challenge. They like new. They do like routine, but they also sometimes you need to change things up.
Yeah, sometimes you got to change things up just to, like I said, he liked to tinker with them. It's like if the horse wasn't performing to the capabilities that he thought they could, he would always just try and observe and tinker and figure out like what can I do here to get this horse to just be a little bit better.
Jay Pribman with us as we pay tribute to John Sheriffs, and things are still in flux in terms of arrangements and memorials and the like. So we'll wait to hear. But the outpouring has just been just incredible. Jay, is there a horse or a performance that will stay with you more than others?
Yeah, I think Zenyatta's classic win at Santa Anita. I was working that telecast for ESPN, and my assignment was to shadow John and interview him after the race. I had done the same thing the previous day with him with Life is Sweet when she won I think it was called the Ladies Classic that year, which was fortunately a short-lived rename. But she had won what should have been the distaff. Anyway, the next day, Classic, and with a cameraman, and John watched the race from about 75 yards up from the finish line, trackside on the outer rail, just on the outside of the outer rail, between the outer rail and where the fans would be. And Mac McBride from the publicity department who was very good friends with John, was going to do the post-race quotes, and so was standing next to him. But I was on the other side of the camera, and when the race ends, there's some stuff on YouTube you'll see like John and Mac reacting to her victory. But then I slid in after that and interviewed John right away and got his immediate joyful reaction. But then what happened next will always stay with me. We went under the rail, got onto the track, and started walking/jogging towards the winner's circle, because by then Zenyatta was going to be turning around and coming back. And the place was going crazy because she was such a popular horse, and she had just won the biggest race of the Breeders' Cup in front of her adoring fans. And John just got so caught up in the moment, and he took the Mill Ridge cap he was wearing off and just flung it into the crowd. And that I'll never forget. I mean, that was just a great, pure joy moment of John Sheriff's when Zenyatta won the Classic.
And a famous, really a famous image. I didn't realize that your proximity to that. That's tremendous. I've told this story, and I've had I've had Billy Rappaport tell the story, the same kind of a thing, Jay, right after a win, and Giacomo wins the Derby, and there's the scene in front of the cupola, and then all of a sudden Billy's looking around, we got the trophy presentation up on the pedestal, and John's walking back to the barn with Giacomo.
Right. Yep.
And Billy's got his arms up in the air. John, you're killing me, John. And so John looked over his shoulder. He says, "You got to come back."
He did come back. He did come back, and I remember him coming to the post-race interview stuff that was done in the fairly new Derby Museum at that point that year, and I remember them coming in there for that. So it's a rare winner's circle photo that John Sheriff got in. I mean, he rarely would get in winner's circle photos.
Right.
Really enjoyed just watching the scene of his owners and the help being in the winner's circle, and he'd more often than not be standing off to the side, just sort of observing that whole scene and taking a great pleasure in just watching other people's enjoyment of the horses win.
100%. Shug McGahee, somebody else that does that. That has to be dragged in occasionally to a photo. Jay, thanks for this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I want, just before we go, Steve, just two really quick anecdotes I want to tell you. We talked about John as a horseman, but as a person, he was just very kind. And when I was recovering from my cancer surgery, almost 5 years ago now, there was like a couple of days after like a week or so after the surgery, I was just recovering in the hospital, and I got a text from him. It said, "Here's your horse fix," and it was just like a video of him going down the shed row and interacting with some horses. And then a couple months later, he sent me, because I was away from the track for about 4 months, and he sent me another one. They had relocated to Del Mar, and it was just a photo of the visitor's chair that he had outside his barn, his barn office at Del Mar, and it said, "Your chair's waiting for you."
Yeah.
And then just one other one, and not too many people know this story. When Zenyatta was racing, I did a radio show in Southern California for about 20 years, and at the time Zenyatta was running, we had an engineer for the show who had a couple of autistic boys, and their kids had somehow gotten interested in watching the races, and I think it was just sort of by osmosis of their father working on this horse racing radio show. But long story short, he asked me one day, he said, "Do you think my kids could come out and see Zenyatta?" And I was like, "I'll ask. He's a pretty kind guy. I think so." Anyway, John did, and these kids came out and had a wonderful morning at Hollywood Park with Zenyatta, and ever since then, I've kept in touch with him over the years, and he since has relocated out of the Southern California area. But the kids still do equine therapy, but it started with that. But those are the kinds of examples of what a person John was beyond just being a great horse trainer.
Yeah, 100%. Jay. I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you for having me on to talk about John, Steve. I appreciate it.
Not at all. Jay Bribman. We weren't going to do this without Jay. And as tough as this always is, Ron Anderson, one of the people you hear from in these circumstances, because trainers and jock agents are in constant contact. And when you have the kinds of riders that Ron Anderson has had, there's no horseman that hasn't had regular interaction with Ron. Ron, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Steve. How are you?
These are always challenging, but you want it to be celebratory at the same time, and for you, and this has been a very bad stretch for the game in terms of losses, and you're going to reflect on John and also Randy Winnick.
Yeah, we lost a couple of really good guys. John Sheriff's, I have a few words. He was kind. He was generous. He would be one of the only people maybe on the racetrack of a select few that really no one had anything, I don't think, bad to say about him. And on the racetrack, that's almost impossible. Odd would be a good word. He was odd. We're all odd. Let me put it this way. I'm a big believer we're all odd or we wouldn't be at the racetrack. So, but he was just a little different odd. He, racetracker through and through. He'd be a guy that would be at the barn every day in the morning from early morning and be there through feed time. And if he ran one late in the day, he'd be there to watch the horse completely cool out, an hour after the race. I was a little miffed, and I've been around him forever. I remember when he was a leg guy for Bill Sparr. And if you could understand the success that Bill Sparr had, John was the guy in the background. He was doing all the leg work and doing, to keep claiming horses in one piece back in the day, like Bill did. You had to have a guy like John. He was a huge asset for Billy Sparr. He was there every day, working on those horses and getting them sound and getting them right to run. Bill had most of his were claiming horses. He won an abundant amount of races. John Sheriff's was the man there originally. He went out on his own. He ends up with a filly that, look, you can say, I've dealt with everybody. I dealt with Charlie Whittingham. I dealt with Bobby Frankel, as you know, was a good friend. John Sheriff took a filly that was too big to probably ever be able to run and brought her along to have one of the most amazing careers of any horse we've ever seen. John Sheriff, that's how good he was. Took her, babied her along. You've seen pictures. You probably saw her in person back in the day. She was an Amazon, of which you take a look at her before she ever started to, you know what, you're going to have a lot of trouble, with conducting her career because she's big, she's huge. So I take my hat off to him. I've been running back and forth to California because I took Antonio out there, and he was so accommodating to everybody, kids and fans. And I remember reading a few years back him talking about back in the day at Santa Anita being on the apron, and he was trying to describe how many people were at Santa Anita on Derby Day and Handicap Day. Now you got to picture this. The apron was just an apron. There were no tables and stuff like there are now. And basically, there wasn't a matrix board in the infield. And basically speaking, he was trying to explain that you could only stand at this eighth pole like we used to stand. He stood in a little different spot. But Lee Searing, I grew up with Lee. We'd stand at the eighth pole, and you could basically, on those days, there were so many people on top of each other. You could only see the horses from like here to there. And what we would do as they came by us, sometimes if our horse was in contention or something we bet our money on, we would run inside to the TV so we could see who hit the wire first, because you couldn't move. And he described that in detail. And right away, I always think of that. And I tell people this story, and they can't really, if you weren't there, you couldn't really grasp what I was trying to say. But, just a magnificent guy. And then if you look at the cart talk with Jonathan Hitchen, there's another, people that didn't know him at all. You would you would understand and realize how different he was by watching Cart Talk. He wins the Kentucky Derby, and he has never watched the replay of the race, because in his mind, you're laughing because you knew him well enough to understand he's the only guy that would probably do this. Most people that win a race like that, the Derby, a Breeders' Cup or whatever, they watch the race not a few times, 100 times. They show their friends, look at this. Never watched the replay of Giacomo. That describes him how different he was, but a great guy to do business with, and just sad that we've lost him. Just a really different, but an unusual, but a really quality person. I feel for Dottie. People don't realize Dottie Ingordo, who was Jerry Ingordo's wife, and David Ingordo's obviously mother. She was Bobby Frankel's, you talk about right-hand person. She did all of his accounting and stuff for years, billing and everything. Bobby trusted her with his life. And really, when Bobby got sick way before he passed away and ended up with cancer, she was one of the only people on the face of the earth that knew he was sick. And he trusted her so much. And I feel bad for her, because her and John, ended up getting together. And they were a good, she was supportive, and she's a kind lady. And, I just feel really bad for her at this point. Another battle. We've had a bad stretch here,
Yeah.
Randy Winnick, real quick. No Randy from when he first came to Hollywood Park, way back, I believe in the 80s maybe, or towards the end of the 80s. He was a product of his father, who was Arnold Winnick, of which most people would know. He was an East Coast guy, Florida guy. He was leading trainer at Gulfstream Park, I want to say, for some crazy stretch, maybe 10 years in a row, before Billy Mott came along. And I think Billy ended up kind of dethroning him. But somebody described Arnold, Randy's father, to me the other day as he was Wayne Lucas on a little different scale before Wayne got really going, and he was East Coast. So Randy came to California. I remember Scotty's dad, Chick McClellan. I said, who is this guy, Randy Winnick, like opening day of Hollywood Park? He said, I don't know who he is. He says, I think he's Arnold's son. He said, Arnold's one of the sharpest guys I've ever seen in my life. So, and then one other quick story about Randy. I haven't been in close touch with him for a while, but anybody that's trying to, get over some sort of abuse, drinking or substance abuse or anything. Randy was a really bad drinker at one point. Steve, he went to meetings every day, twice a day for 2 solid years, morning and night, to try and get over his problem. And he licked it, at that point. So I tell people, here's a guy that really wanted to be well. He didn't want to be sick. And I commend him, and I take my hat off to him. He's a friend. We all grew up together in California. Gary Young was and
Yep.
we had a lot of dinners and parties and celebrations with the kids. Tierney was the same age as my son, so we all just, the families kind of grew up together. But another huge loss. Very sad.
Ron, among your riders, biggest win involving John?
You know what? I didn't do a lot of business with him because I left in 2000 when I went to work for Jerry Bailey. And I didn't, he was an assistant before that. I didn't have any huge wins with him because
Interesting.
I haven't been around him extensively for 25, 26 years. So no, but knew him. Every time I was around him, he was a guy that could just racetrack. He could just talk about anything around the racetrack for as if you wanted to, and viewed him from afar, but so much respect for him as a being to begin with, and then as a horse trainer, he was very different. Nice guy.
Ron, I appreciate it. The too many times I've asked you for these visits, but your perspective. Brian Beach is going to join us in a little bit as well, and the jock agents. You're somewhat. I guess you'd be akin to psychologists or psychiatrists.
In a weird way, we are that we all kind of are, and like I said on the racetrack, odd balls we are, and we all need counseling, or we wouldn't be there.
Exactly right. Ron Anderson, thank you, Ronnie.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Bottom of the hour and 90 minutes in, 90 to come. Jay Hovde's going to join us. We're not going to take a commercial break. We're gonna play a race, and the Giacomo's Derby. Mike Smith will join us tomorrow. But for those of you that there's a certain percentage, I think, of listeners that may have first seen any of my work, as it were, was on the Yahoo sports group Derby Trail, and that gave way to derbytrail.com. But there was a warning, and this was we're still working on the barbecue, and there was a morning where I went over to walked out the backside, the back gate, and went to get coffee. I might have wanted to get breakfast maybe at Wagner's, and they hadn't opened yet. It must have been 6, and so I end up first in line, and then some other people started to pull in the driveway. It was getting close to opening, and second in line suddenly was Mike Smith. And Michael, we'll talk to Mike tomorrow. He's traveling today, and I ended up talking to Mike for 10, 12, 14 minutes, whatever it was, before Wagner's open. And he had just flown in, having worked Giacomo the day before, and started talking to him to me about. I started asking him, what's going on, and how you coming, the post Santa Anita Derby, and he said John is absolutely training him, as they say, to the minute. And this is really the first, because I've been on a lot of Sons of Holy Bull. He said, this is really the first one that when I'm on him, I can really feel the bull. And he was so confident about the way Giacomo was going to run, and I wrote a piece about it for Derby Trail, and then obviously was going to use the Fleet Alex, and actually was able to kind of pull it all together with closing argument as well, but or not closing argument, closing argument, and I can just remember Mike, being there with Mike Smith, and I was aspiring to turf right and do something along these lines, and that was really one of the experiences I think that stays with me, and we'll talk to Mike tomorrow about his relationship with John that is so special, and ended up in so many different ways. Really, when you think about it, added not just a chapter to the back half of Mike Smith's career, but John Sheriff's responsible in a lot of ways for some of really probably what Mike would acknowledge are his greatest moments as a jock. Giacomo, with one of the late charges that it really has become kind of a hallmark in recent, maybe starting with, did it really start with Giacomo, maybe? The big price, late running. Here's Giacomo in the Derby.
Spanish Chestnut breaking from post 13, and they're off in the Kentucky Derby, and Bandini and Spanish Chestnut both broke quickly. Bellamy Road is right there with them, and on the far outside, it's going wild. So a stampede under us for the first time, and as expected, it is Spanish Chestnut in front, going wild right there on the outside. Bellamy Road not far behind in third. Flower Alley is fourth. High Flight 50 twin horses. Closing argument sixth on the outside. High Limit is seventh at the rail, and Bandini is running in eighth position. Sun Pink ninth toward the inside. Buzzards Bay is 10th. Fleet Alex in tight quarters, running 11th. 3 lengths back. Going Silver is now 12th toward the inside. Noble Causeway is 13th. Andromeda's Hero is now 14th. Wilco 15th. Greely's Galaxy 16th. Giacomo 17th in between horses. Sorted Out is 18th. And then Don't Get Mad is 19th. And Greater Good is the last of 20. 45 and 1/5 seconds, among the fastest opening half miles ever in the Kentucky Derby. In the role of the pacemaker, it is Spanish Chestnut. Flower Alley second on the inside. Javier Castellano is now asking Bellamy Road at the half-mile pole. Going wild in between horses, so too High Fly. And Buzzards Bay making a move on the outside, closing argument. A Fleet Alex trying to thread his way through between horses. He will go inside as they round the far turn. 3 furlongs to go here. They ran 3/4 in a bruising 109 and 2. And here comes Bellamy Road, who's charging up on the outside. High Fly is moving with him. Spanish Chestnut is weakening. A Fleet Alex is in behind them. Closing argument is in with the chance there on the outside. Buzzards Bay coming down the middle of the track at the top of the stretch in the Kentucky Derby. High Fly, Bellamy Road, closing argument on the far outside. Here comes a Fleet Alex charging through between horses. Giacomo, Don't Get Mad, late charge on the far outside. Coming down to the finish. Closing argument, short lead. Giacomo, a Fleet Alex. It's a 3-horse photo finish. And on the wire, it's Giacomo, who has won the 131st Kentucky Derby. Close for second, closing argument. And the Fleet Alex, Don't Get Mad, was fourth. The final time was 2:02 and 3. So it is Giacomo, the winner of the Derby, and the second biggest long shot in the 131-year history of this race. Giacomo.
Tom Durkin with just an unbelievable job. Just a great call. And I'll add, as Jay Hovde is joining us, I'll add one other anecdote about that experience. I watched that Derby from the old the old Churchill. There's an old Churchill every 10 minutes because there's always something new being done. But there was a pillbox basically right above the tunnel from the paddock to the track, and the Butch Lear was his office, and I watched that Derby from there, and the stairway comes down and empties you right into the tunnel, and I came down quite excited, and the first person I encountered was Kieran McLaughlin, who had watched from the little. There was a little office with a TV, which is where Wayne Lucas used to watch his derbies, and Kieran watched from there. And Kieran came out and was just stunned and just saying, I thought he won it. I thought we were winning it. I thought we had it won, and I'll just never forget it. And seeing a horseman who was literally yards from a Derby win, very similar actually to Larry Ravelli and Jareth Loveberry with Phil, with two Phils. Now is it 3 years ago? But Giacomo and everything that came with it for Smith and the Mosses and John and Dottie. Jay Hovde, good morning.
Good morning, Steve. I watched it from the roof of the constantly under construction Churchill Downs, way up at the top. I guess the grandstand was being reimagined beneath us, and I figured, well, let's just get away as far as we can from the hubbub and get a good view. And yeah, my mom bet on Giacomo, and years later, I was able to introduce my mother to John Sheriffs and Zenyatta, and it's one of her most precious pictures that she got to have her picture taken with Zenyatta, with John standing there. And he offered to take the picture with me. I said, no, John, no, you're a trainer. You're not a photographer. But he was everything. He could do it all. He would love this show today, by the way. He would really be enjoying this show. And he would be wondering who this St. John person was that everyone keeps talking about. He'd be very amused by the whole affair and how maudlin and sad everyone is, and we have a right to be, because we're very selfish. John is taken from our lives, and we enjoyed him in our lives very much, and it's not fair. We wanted more of him, but we better count the days and that we had him, that were a blessing every minute.
Jay, you wrote a fabulous appreciation, and you've got kind of that horizon perspective that has touched multiple generations of horsemen, and I really have cautioned myself for a week of trying not to say that he was a throwback. He wasn't a throwback. He was completely unique, and there's no comparing him to anybody.
Well, he was a sponge, is what he was.
Interesting.
A student of the game, a student of history. Appreciated it. Took the time to appreciate it, because so many trainers through the years are just caught up in acquiring new stock, acquiring new owners. The hassles and everything like that, and then at some point they started to have to worry about their win percentage, for goodness sakes, and it's all the things that were heaped upon what we used to think of was what the trainer's main job was, is caretaker and of the physical and preparation for the events to come, and then management of careers. But so John just kind of rose above all that a little bit. You'd like to think he did, but I'm sure his concerns were as deep and worrying as anyone else's. But he would take something from everyone. through the years. I mean, he got to know all the classic horsemen if he could. He was, of course, became a student of John Nehrude and just reveled in the fact that he was in Nehrude's old barn in those couple of seasons he was at Belmont Park, to the extent that when Braulio Baeza came around, he was deposed as a racing official in that scandalous episode back then, but Braulio still was very welcome individual on the backstretch, and he became John's kind of his barn jester. John would talk about Braulio's practical jokes, and there was John, like a kid in a candy store, in John Nehrude's barn, where he adorned Dr. Fager's old stall with memorabilia, and Braulio Baeza, Dr. Fager's rider, was having fun around the barn. So that's just one of many examples of how he could really tap into the best of any generation, of any kind of discipline, and he made it all his.
In your dealings, Jay, just reflect on on the imprint that he put on on the game, on horses. I started earlier this morning with Steve Haskin and suggested that the way Zenyatta was shared with the public really kind of set off what's been a series of prominent horses that kind of set an example for others. I mean, Baffert with American Pharaoh, and McPeak most recently with Swiss Skydiver, and then Torpedo Anna, and it's gone a long way. We talk often that the current generations don't have proximity to the horse, but John really kind of crafted a new era for the game, and I think a fabulous precedent that's proven invaluable.
Well, yeah, but John respected the horse first. You can't do that with every horse, and Zenyatta was that perfect storm of the outsized celebrity thoroughbred who was also very very social, very accommodating, very very placid. I have pictures of my little girl on her, and so I'm not alone in that. With Zenyatta nuzzling her and her golden curls when she was, well, I guess she'd be about 4 years old, something like that. And yes, Baffert was stabled right beside him there at Del Mar for the Zenyatta period, and Bob got to watch John's handling of Zenyatta close up. Bob was Bob is not an envious sort of guy. He likes to think of his horses as being pretty good, and he thought Midnight Loot was the biggest, fastest horse he'd ever seen, and so he took a measuring stick over to Zenyatta one day, and John accommodated him, and he said, I don't believe she's bigger than Midnight Loot. And Bob, took the stick to her and checked out the withers and the measurements, and it was like she was 17 1 3/4 or some unbelievable thing. And Bob just walked away shaking his head, thinking, well, I didn't believe it, but now I do. But Bob, Bob very much was among those trainers that watched John with Zenyatta, and he was very much followed in that pathway with American Pharaoh, making him so available because he was the kind of colt, unusual for a colt certainly, but the kind of colt who could accommodate a lot of public exposure and just up close and personal kind of things. And of course, no John Shirreffs, no American Pharaoh. He trained Yankee Gentleman, his dam sire.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that. There's so many just overlap and intrigue when it comes to the personalities and in a lot of cases horses that I said this to Jay Privman earlier. Horses that would not have achieved whatever level, and that level can be anything. That can be getting to the races. That can be breaking a maiden. Winning a minor stake, winning a Grade 1, winning Breeders' Cup Classics. And in fact, Jay, you in that piece that you wrote in Blood Horse, you talked about John's. One of John's hallmarks in terms of his approach, which is, understanding the way horses think, quote unquote, and what their priorities are, and his ability to do that, his ability to perceive what might be bothering a horse, and then how to adjust accordingly, making sure that they don't lose confidence in their human partners.
Well, that's true, and that that's basic. He let things fail a lot before he got to answers, which the great inventors, the great scientists, the great those kinds of disciplines. That's what they have to do too. Their failures are legion before they get to answers. I mean, his latest thing was a clicker, which I had, and I said, "What?" I said, "No, I like to use a clicker now," and he was using it. The first time I ever heard of the clicker was World War II, as we equipped our soldiers when they landed in Normandy after D-Day, and they were going through the hedgerows, and it was dark, and there were Germans everywhere, and they signaled with a little clicker if it was friendly troops, and so you'd hear these clickers in the hedgerows. Well, John found that a clicker would be a way to distract a horse from his worries. Because their hearing is like their number one, radar of all their warning systems. And so, if a horse was fretting or didn't want to do something or was exhibiting some behaviors that was taking away from his best performance or his healthiest attitudes, John's had this clicker, and he started clicking at him, and the horse would look around, and then it became like the clicker was fun. It became a game. And so he'd be clicking a horse as he walked over for a race, just to keep his mind on something other than what he was going to be worrying about if he didn't have something else to think about. I mean, these are basic, beautiful sacking out kind of horsemanship, but John had them all in his quiver and would deploy them at odd and unexpected times for the horses. And of course, the barn was used to it. The guys around the barn, they never knew what John was going to do next, so they just sort of accommodated him. And that's the boss. He was always coming up with something a little bit, turning of the prism. He also had time for everyone, and I don't know how that's possible. Because as far as I could tell, there was still only 24 hours in his day, although I don't think he thought of time in that way. But he had to have time for himself. I mean, there was, certain things he had to, get through a day, but he literally had time for everyone. And whether it was a visitor, whether it was, a racing official, someone in the game, a client, a reporter, whatever. But what he would do was he seemed to have that uncanny ability, and there's some people are like this. Great politicians are like this. He left you thinking that you were the most important thing, most important encounter of his day, or at least perhaps the most entertaining, because he would focus in on what you were interested in that overlapped with his. So if it was history, if it was photography, if it was electronic gadgets, if it was holistic medicines and treatments. If it was, he didn't go into politics. Politics and religion sort of bored him because they were so divisive. But philosophy, certainly. And he always had that sort of Renaissance approach to life where, yes, I can be identified as a thoroughbred trainer, but that's not all of me.
Jay, I can't urge people enough to read the piece that you wrote, because it incorporates so much of John's no, I won't say professional life, but his life experience. Let's put it that way. Going back to Loma Rica, and when the book about Noor came out, John was more excited than.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
That he was so thrilled just that Noor was getting a new audience. I loved that, and he talked extensively about encountering Noor and getting on him.
That's true, and those days, like all of us, we turn to our formative days as being very important and what we become later. Certainly, he you can't minimize the fact that he was a Marine in Vietnam, and I've always had a theory that horsemen who come out of real combat to either return to racing or go into racing have a little different view of their care of horses. They really think of them in terms of being almost companions in battle. That they don't ask. I mean, John was a through line to Greg Gilchrist, who fought in Vietnam as well, and Charlie Whittingham, and Noble Threewitt, and Leonard Dorfman, who were veterans of World War II. And they didn't have office jobs in the States. They were in places like Guadalcanal and Battle of the Bulge in Italy, and Henry Marino was in some terrible experiences in Korea. Those guys came back and came to horses a little bit differently, and John was much of that. I'll use one of your favorite words, ilk. He respected what he was asking his horses to do, just as he found himself in places where men were asked to do some very dangerous things, and he always kind of approached it from that point as well.
I'll throw in one more name. Tommy Kelly, DJ Kelly, was
absolutely.
a medic.
Yep.
In World War II, and Tommy couldn't talk about it because I asked on air a couple of times, and he would get distant about it. So point well taken. Greg Gilchrist is going to join us actually, Jay, in a little bit.
That's terrific. That is
and
terrific.
Mac McBride.
You got the right lineup.
Right, another, and it's both Mac and Gilchrist. They bonded over their experience, over their Vietnam experience. Absolutely.
You asked Jay Privman to cite a lasting memory of John and certainly the hurling of the cap into the crowd. And I don't know if we ever find out who got that cap. I'm sure we did at the time. But gosh, of the many John Sheriff's lingering memories, and maybe they're all of a variation on a theme. But I think it was at the Kentucky Derby in the tack room later that night. Of course, the Derby goes off at 6 o'clock, so this must have been like 8 o'clock or something like that. And I was just sitting in the corner of the tack room and making some notes or something, and John is preparing Giacomo his wheatgrass and turmeric slurry, and I'm thinking, I suppose Ben Jones did this for his horses too, and Sonny Jim and all. So here he takes this bucket over to the Kentucky Derby winner with his gray snout and sticks it in and slurps it up, and he's got an orange mug, an orange muzzle, about the most indistinguished looking Kentucky Derby winner pose that you can imagine. And John just said, "Oh, he just loves it. This is good for them when they're letting down. That to me was John Sheriff's. There were no trappings. It was a glorious day, a glorious moment, and he was probably never happier than he was that day. But he just figured, well, this too shall pass, and we'll be happy again someday."
Jay Hovde joining us as we celebrate John Sheriffs. And Jay, I guess in a lot of ways this is one of the things that the show does that I think is the most important, is to create a lasting memorial to the people that have made the game so engaging. And
he certainly gave you a series of wonderful interviews through the years. At the drop of a hat, and I'm sure you never knew what was going to happen. And that's not only the nature of your game, but that's also what John brought to us, a never-ending series of wonderful surprises.
Well, again, do not miss. I'll send the link out. Actually, I know I retweeted it at the time, but the piece. What Sheriffs left behind was more than enough. Although we did want more, Jay, for sure.
We're greedy bastards, that's for sure.
100%. Jay Hovde, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Jay Hovde, folks, and Jay just so eloquent, and there's so many stories. I probably should have had him. I should have had Jay read the piece. That would have been all right. There's so many tangents, and then that was Sheriffs. That was, and I'm just thinking that I talked about that book by the book was Milt Toby wrote that book, the late Milt Toby. So somebody else wrote the book about Noor, and John, I think the show have heard and reached out to me, and he said, I can tell you about Noor, and then I think I had him, I think John on subsequently, and he talked about Noor at Lo Marica when John was there, working on the young horses. It's too funny, but he was so excited that Noor got a new generations of fans. Steve Anderson joins us, and it was Steve that had the difficult chore of communicating to horse players and stakeholders and fans. And it passed, and has done really a wonderful job with the formal obituary and all the subsequent reporting that's been associated with it. Steve Anderson of the Daily Racing Form. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm privileged to be on the program today on this topic.
Well, you again, like Hovde, like Privman, like Haskin, Shulman, your careers all pretty much overlaid with John's, and there's some barns, Steve, that you walk with trepidation and exasperation, knowing that it may be an arduous assignment. And then there's Barnes and people at Clocker's Corner you stride up to, eager to hear what they have to say, and John certainly fit in that camp.
Well, the fun part about dealing with John Sheriffs for 28 years, nearly 27 years, was like he would have this spot on the path between the barn area and Clocker's Corner at Santa Anita where you were directly across from the turn. And he would stand there. If you happen to know what I'm speaking about, it's got a wonderful view, just a spectacular view on a clear day of the mountains and all that. But you'd see the horses come around the turn and go away from you towards down the stretch. And that would be his spot in the mornings more than on most mornings. He'd go to the stands when he'd have a workout or something. But if he was just watching the horse exercise, that's where he'd stand. And we'd hang out there. And you'd walk up to him and you'd say, anything new? And oftentimes you'd never know. You would never open your notebook. You would just visit and you talk about state of affairs in racing. Maybe you have a casual conversation about some of the runners in his barn, and or just talk about what he was reading. You guys just mentioned the book, and he gave me a book on the Grand National, English Grand National, that was published in 1931, and I still have it. And it's really cool to talk to him over the years about his fascination with racing in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Notably, some of the tracks that are long gone in the New York City area. They're Jerome's, and there's a few others too. But that was fascinating to him to read about the customs of the sport and the way the game was operated and the way that men trained horses in those years. So much different than today because it just changes. So we often just got caught up, and then there'd always be fun times, where you go into the barn. And he'd be in a stall somewhere, and I said, what are you up to? He goes, worried about this one's back, or, something small, it wasn't anything major, but he was always working with the horse, trying to get to know the runner. He wasn't someone who spent all of his time at Clocker's Corner with a cup of coffee in his hand. He was active. He was in the barn and enjoyed that. And that's one of the many things that are going to be missed with his passing last week, is that's one less in the barn area that you can talk to somebody and get caught up about racing and talk about cool horses like Byk. Just a few weeks ago, I was in the barn the next morning. Westwood won the San Pasquale, and Westwood, who's now trained by, was just gone to Peter Urton the last few days, on for the Santa Anita Handicap on March 7th, a race because of its tradition, blown out by the Pegasus and Saudi and the Dubai races now, so it's not like it used to be. But for still California, for the old-time purists or guys who appreciate older horses staying training, it's a race that has a lot of meaning, and he was looking forward to trying to get a win in that race with Westwood. So should Westwood do well in the big cap in a few weeks' time, it'll be kind of a poignant win for the team because of the horses' background. And Westwood was third last year in the Westwood was in the Santa Anita Derby last year as a maiden, and the race has really held up. And John was really proud of the fact that he tried some things with the horse, ran him in stakes races when he was a maiden, but also that he's come along and done really well as an older horse too. So there was a measure of pride there in the way that he developed the horse. Excuse me. So that's that. And then Baeza, he was just so eager to see what that one could do this year. He had the Pennsylvania Derby win, game races in the Belmont and the Kentucky Derby to just hint that, if one of those other runners this year, now it's Bill Mott's job, if one of those other leading runners in the division or any of the older horses have a bad day or they're just not 100%, and Baeza is, that one's going to win a race. You know what I mean? That's the sort of foundation that Sheriffs had laid with Baeza over the course of the last 12 months to get him positioned to have a nice 4-year-old season in 2026.
Steve, one topic that hasn't been broached really yet is the transition from Hollywood, from training at Hollywood to Santa Anita, because he was Hollywood based, right, for the vast majority of time.
Yes, and his barn was barn 57 was at the back. Basically, it was on the. If you were in the stands, it was the farthest in the back on the right. If you were looking out onto the barn area, which was behind the backstretch. So he had the barn that was a little bit out of the way. It was down at the end of the road, but it was next to the training track, and they had a little about a half-mile training track that was in the back of the joint, and so he had that, and he had a huge yard, decent-sized yard considering the tight layout of that barn area, with a nice piece of grass there. That was between the north side of that barn and the training track. So he had a little bit of space there. So he enjoyed, I think, that little environment that he had, and he had that barn for all the way to the end of the track's existence in 2013, and that was where he had Giacomo, and that's where he had Zenyatta and others. He had Life is Sweet, and that was the little gathering point in 2010, particularly for people that would just show up in the barn area and wanted to see Zenyatta. And they were very respectful, often very respectful about going into the barn. They'd wait outside, and then he'd bring her out often, and they'd get a chance to take pictures and just kind of hang out in the vicinity of her. He'd keep her a little bit away, maybe walk her in a little toe ring. But the folks would be jazzed to be able to do that, and he was very accommodating to those people. So he was high. A lot of his horses raced there. He didn't exclude races at Santa Anita and Del Mar by any means, but he was very focused on operating at Hollywood Park, and as was several other people. Bobby Frankel was based there as well during his career, during the latter segment of his career, and Neil Drysdale and things like that. They were very, very comfortable, working out of that base.
Steve, what one of the questions that sort of has emerged? What moment? What win? What stays with you? What will you specifically indelible moment with John?
Well, unfortunately, it's 8:15 Pacific in the morning, and I'm afraid that we would be here till tomorrow's program if we started. But there were quite a few that were really poignant. Most so proud of Manistee Senior. She was a fine mare in the 1999 and 2000 seasons for Marshall Nafe's 505 farms. And at the time, John was in the final years of working as a private trainer for 505, an arrangement that lasted about 7 or 8 years, from the mid 90s to the early 2000s, 2000 or so. And that was a really remarkable horse to follow, and he was very proud of how good she was. She didn't win a Breeders' Cup, but she was really strong in a lot of races when the California filly and mare dirt division was a lot stronger and a lot deeper than it is today. So she took on a lot of nice horses and won like 9 Grade 1 and Grade 2 races. She was really a very special horse, and she was huge. I think she was like 17 hands. One day on the I recall, this isn't a and he was walking her back to the barn area that leads past the receiving barn when her halter broke, and she didn't have anything on. And here's this huge mare, essentially just, and he just kind of hugged her. He grabbed her around the neck, and my colleague Vince Bruin witnessed this, and so he just held her, in place. And Amy DeLassy, who was working at the time for her father Wally, if I remember correctly, ran into the receiving barn, grabbed any old bridle that she could find that happened to be laying there, and raced out. I mean, probably some cheap vinyl number, and ran out and put it on Manistee so they could get her back to the barn of horsemanship. And you look at this from afar and you think, how do you respond instantaneously to a crisis? Because the last thing you want to see is a prized mare, one of the top 3 or 4 in the nation, zooming around the barn area at 35 miles per hour, like she's in a field. Well, he found a way to solve the problem of an assist from Amy. They got the job done. But the fun part was, amongst many, was the very early starts of Zenyatta's career, because he had said in advance of her debut, as she was just getting her training going, I have Balance's little sister, and Balance was a very nice mare trained by David Hoffman's for John and Jerry Ammerman, who was a Grade 1 winner and a high-quality mare. So there was a lot of anticipation at the end of 2007 about Zenyatta, and she won her debut on Thanksgiving, and then she won an allowance race in December, and then she won at the El Encino, and time went at that Santa Anita in January of 2008, and then she went to the Apple Blossom and won, and that was cool because then she took the game out of town. There's just some California upstart. Let's see what she can solve. The rest of the nation. Well, she won, and then she brought her home. One thing led to another, and it was Vanity Handicap in the summer of 2008. And I was talking with my editor at the time, Ira Kaplan. I go, "This is a really unique horse. But we may be onto something here." I said, "I'd like to do an article about it. Let's plan something special." He goes, "Yeah, you're on. We better. Well, let's go ahead and do it now." I said, "Well, we can do it at Del Mar." He goes, "No. Let's do it now. She might get beat one of these days." So no, she didn't get beat in Vanity, and she didn't get beat in the Clement Hirsch, and she wound up winning the Ladies Classic, now the Distaff, in the fall of 2008. And of course, in 2009, she made history as the first to win the Classic, which is an easy one to claim as your favorite result because it is so easy to remember. It wasn't 17 years ago, this fall. It seemed like it was 17 minutes ago sometimes. But the build up to that and watching the public respond to that mare over the course of the year, and the way John handled her as a trainer. She wasn't clear. She didn't run 16 times a year. You look back on Serena Song, didn't run 16 times a year, but Serena Song had an extraordinarily active career, indicative of many of the horses trained by D. Wayne Lucas. They raced. John was a little more selective, a lot more selective. He picked races for her, sometimes 45, 60 days apart, and maybe miss a race along the way, or miss something that was obvious, but go for one and have her ready for that. Many reasons for that as well. But by the time the spring of 2009 came around, and she won the Milady Handicap, if memory serves correct, to Hollywood that spring, you could sense that there was a buzz that was drawing people who were not the typical racing crowd. You were seeing new faces at Hollywood Park that spring and summer, and at Del Mar that summer as well, because they were eager to see what she was, unbeaten at the time and on her way. What we didn't realize at the time was so. It was really a refreshing time in racing. A lot of enthusiasm with me and many other members of the media informed on what was going on. But I think behind it all there was a high measure of satisfaction and a high measure of pride that he was able to tell the story about his mare, and can't imagine the pressure, especially when the wins got into the double digits and the attention really swelled. He handled it really, really well. So much so that in the fall of 2010, before she went to Churchill and got beat, I went to the barn to watch her work out in I guess it was probably the middle of September of that fall, and I walked into his office, and I usually just sat down and waited until he came back in, and then everybody went out to watch the workout. I didn't sit down because Bob Simon is a leading producer on 60 Minutes still, and a feature on Zenyatta, and to watch that, to see that level of interest was really kind of cool, and remarkable. To see the sport presented in that manner, in that way, and not about a front office issue. No, it was about a racehorse as an athlete. And again, John was at the center of that. So it was really a fascinating period in California racing and nationally too.
Steve Anderson, everybody. Steve, I appreciate this, and also the warm way you handled the reporting of John's passing.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Yeah, that's going to be a fun guy to remember over the years, and many more stories. Sometimes when you go back in your old articles and go on the internet and do a little work, you find things you go, oh yeah, that was a cool moment too. And there's many of them with John Sheriffs, and as you said, he will be missed as a racing man and just as a guy, and that's a big shock and a big blow to California and American racing that he's passed away.
Steve Anderson, everybody, DRF Anderson, and one of the great turf riders, not just for the West Coast, but just widely acknowledged for his tireless efforts, and somebody who shared John's love of any kind of racing. Steve, as we've talked many times, loves the international scene. He loves Cheltenham. He loves the jumps. He loves everything about the game. And our next two voices, our next two guests, Mac McBride and Greg Gilchrist, kind of really timed well, because when Steve mentioned the pressure that started to build as Zenyatta piled up the wins, and it became a very notable streak. John was pretty impervious to the pressure, and a lot of it has to originate in his service as a Marine. And John and Mac and Greg Gilchrist all share that experience as Vietnam veterans. Mac McBride from Del Mar joins us now. Mac, I know that John was one of your real special friends, and I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Steve, he was a star. He was a wonderful human being. He was a man's man. He loved his horses. He loved the people that worked with him and worked around him. John was John, and they don't make too many Johns. He was a star. I very much enjoyed all my interactions with him over the years. And I was thinking about it. I'd probably go back about 30, 35 years with him. And when I heard that he had passed, oh Lord, just talk about your heart sinking. So I had a couple of very good chapters with John. One was his Kentucky Derby in 2005 with Giacomo. I have had the pleasure of working for the Derby Notes team at Churchill for the last, oh man, they usually give me the West Coast guys because I know them, I've interacted with them. And I had John the year he brought Giacomo down there. And we talked a little bit, we're both a couple of old Marines, and, we told a few war stories, and then that was the end of that. And we really got into the horses. And I said, John, Giacomo, now you're running a horse here, going to be a big price. I said, why are you here? He said, the owner wants to come. I think he's a nice colt. I have a good rider. I think we got a little shot, and hey, in this game, if you have a little shot, you give it a go. So he comes down the stretch, and bingo bango, John is a Kentucky Derby winner. And it didn't change him. He took it gladly and gloriously, but next day he was John Sheriff's again, no doubt about it. And then, of course, there was Zenyatta. And, she ran, I think she ran and won 3 stakes at Del Mar. And then here now we come to the Breeders' Cup Classic against the Colts. And I now am working for the Breeders' Cup Notes team, headed by a guy named Jack Will, who Jack is no longer with us. But Jack says to me, look, we're going to need a quote from Sheriff's, win, lose, or draw. If the mare wins, of course, even if she runs last, we still need a quote from Sheriff. I want you to go downstairs ahead of this race, get in the paddock, get with John, and follow the horse and get a quote from John immediately after the race is done. So I do. I'm in the paddock with John, and we go down, and I'll tell you, you go through a tunnel at Santa Anita that leads out and up and onto the racetrack, and all sorts of folks on either side of the tunnel. And they were, when Zenyatta came through, they were screaming and shouting and jumping up and down. And she was getting very, very nervous. She was starting to twitch all over the place. And John John sort of shouted at the crowd, settle down, settle down. And he kind of took hold of her, and everything did settle down a little bit. And she went back and she walked out of the tunnel and onto the racetrack. She did a little dance, went into the gate. I remember they had an incident at the gate with a young 3-year-old then in Quality Road, and everybody had to stay in the gate for a fair while. But so I'm with John, and I said, John, we're going to stay down here by the winner. He said, no, I'd like to go up by the 16th pole and get a good look at the race then. So we go up to the 16th pole, and I'm trying to be professional now. I'm only there to do a job. I need to get that quote, and I've got to do this the right way. And here they start to run the race. And then, of course, we hit the far turn, and she starts to pick it up. And Trevor Denman picks her up, as only Trevor could. And he makes that call. Anybody listening, if you want to hear the best race call, I think, of all time, go back and listen to Trevor call the Classic in 2009. And with every call he made, unbelievable. She is making another jump and passing another horse, and she wins the race. And I lose it. I am no longer the disinterested reporter. I am now a serious racing fan, and I'm with my buddy John Sheriffs. John is screaming and shouting, "Come on, Mike! Come on, Mike!" And I'm screaming and shouting, "Come on, Zenyatta! Come on, Zenyatta!" And God bless, she gets there. Oh, I mean, absolutely the best horse race I have ever had anything to do with. Just a miracle, and this great, big, beautiful equine doing her thing. It was special, and I loved it so much because it was John.
We're going to listen to. We'll close the show actually with Trevor's call and that classic. I remember watching from the box, and I must admit, Mac, that I was one of those players that was always betting on someone else whenever she lined up. And Summer Bird was our favorite for that because I latched on to Tim Ice and the doctors and Tim's wife that Tina got very friendly with. But it's as you describe. I mean, it kind of unfolded, and really it's like in a slow motion, and I don't say that as a dig on the synthetic.
Yep. No. Yeah. She just top of it. No. Today's the day. No, she can't do it. It's a cold. She's doing it, and here she comes. And she did her thing one more time. Just amazing. Subsequently, I went by the barn on more than one occasion to get quotes from him, whatever. I remember going there one morning, just after training hours, and in line had to be 50 people waiting in line to get their picture taken with Zenyatta. John had the groom out with the horse, and the people would go one by one, and they'd get their picture, and they'd all pet her and kiss her and do all those things. And John just smiled. He just smiled. I went by that barn another morning, and there was a guy in there. I said, gee, he kind of looks familiar. Well, it was a guy named Miles McPherson. Miles played pro football. He played with the Rams. He played with the Chargers. He was a DB. He was a terrific player. And he left pro football and founded a church in San Diego. It's called the Rock Church, and it has grown greatly. He's got thousands of worshipers. He's written books. He's a very religious man. He's very good. and John introduced me. He said, "This is Miles. Hi, Mike." And I said, "Hi, Miles. Well, why are you here?" He said, "I have found out it is very, very good to be near greatness." And that's why he was there. He wanted to be near greatness. And it helped him with his sermon that Sunday. What can you say? John Sheriff, Senada. I tell you, John loved Mexican food. He was a real big fan of Mexican food. And there's a Mexican restaurant down here in Del Mar, not far from the car, called Tony Jacal's. And John and Dottie, I believe, ate there every single night they were in Del Mar. They loved it. It's classic old school Mexican. They loved it. And they Tony Jacal's virtually every night when we ran a Del Mar meeting. I tell you, he was a special guy. He was a star. He was the man's man. I just loved seeing him and hanging out with him. And good dude. I'm going to miss him forever.
Well, Mac, and you've had your own the health scare this past year, and when we all get to certain junctures, I guess you treasure every minute. The way this unfolded, really, everybody I think feels like they just have been robbed of the pleasure that you would get anytime you interacted with John.
You got it.
Mac McBride, everybody, and on that note, how you feeling? You
Oh, I'm doing good. No problem. Thank you for asking, but touch wood, I'm recovered. It's all good. No problems at all. And I am very much looking forward to another stint down at Churchill Downs for the Derby.
Excellent.
And hanging out with Steve Byk, one of my favorites.
Mac, I'm delighted to hear we're going to see you in really not much time at all. But I know how I know it was important to get you on here and to have you contribute.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Good.
Not
and I
all.
appreciate all you do for horse racing. How you do this show 5 days a week is way beyond me. But you do it, and you do it great. And racing owes you a big-time salute. And I'm going to say thank you, sir. Keep on rolling.
Mac, thank you. Mac McBride, everybody. And as I mentioned, when Mac came on, that the next two voices were going to be, brothers in arms with John Sheriffs. Greg Gilchrist joins us, and another who became friends with John and had the shared experience in Vietnam. Greg, I hate that this is the reason I'm calling you, but I appreciate the opportunity to add your voice to the appreciations of John Sheriffs.
Well, thanks for having me. I kind of wish it was under different circumstances, but it is what it is, Steve.
I know.
How did you? When did you first start to become friendly with John?
I've been listening to the show and listening to people that knew him a long time, but I first met John, I think, back in the early 70s. Slow walking, slow talking John Sheriff, and that big smile. He never did change much. I think the first time that I saw John, and he'd been working up at Loma Rica Ranch for a guy called Henry Freitas. Yeah. And I don't know. I think I was just loping horses. I'm not even sure I was training yet, but I see this guy, it was at Golden Gate Fields, and I see this guy walking down the road, and I was raised in the country. I mean, this guy looked like he'd just come in from milking the cows or something. He had these big rubber boots on. Of course, he had that ball cap. And I don't know, somehow see each other. And we got to sharing stories. Of course, the Vietnam thing come up. And we kicked that around a little bit, not for long, because just something you don't talk that much about.
Right.
And, you know, we just became friends. He was always a great guy.
Greg, his horsemanship, what we've heard this morning, is I thought Jay Hovde had a great suggestion about John being a sponge and picking up and incorporating anything and everything that that he thought could contribute to making a horse better. You talk about what you'd see from him in terms of his approach to managing and developing horses.
Well, I think the biggest thing I noticed about John, which I always admired, was his patience, which has been brought up today. But, you know, you train a person. If you got a person that you're training, you got a horse you're training, and they're both running on the same day, if the person's not feeling well, they can tell you. If a horse is not doing that good that morning, you have to see it in him. And I think John was always a hands-on guy, in and out of stalls every day. So he just took that approach to his training. And I think that probably that's one thing that brought him so much success.
And you know, we certainly brought out one of the things. I mean, that when he started to get the chance and you know, had a wider array of clients, he had to have managed the clients as well as he managed the horses, because there's a lot of owners that are not patient, and they want a return on investment. They want wins. They're not as patient, but it feels like John really cultivated patience from that standpoint.
Yeah, he just had that way about him. And I don't think John probably, there's probably a lot of people that wouldn't have wanted John to train for him, because he wasn't going to do things unless he knew that they were being done right. I mean, he's a guy that did probably more with less meaning numbers.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That
yeah.
If things weren't right that day, then the horse wasn't going over there. And if the owner couldn't take it, well, then that was just tough luck, because the horse was always going to be first in his book.
Very much. You know, did you get to run against them that often?
No, not that much. You know, when John left, he didn't leave with a whole lot. I think he was still driving that old VW van with the flowers on it. You know, so John kind of fell into that kind of thing. And when he started doing well in Southern California, it kind of surprised me, because I didn't know that much. I knew he knew horses and what kind of guy he was, but I started paying a whole lot more attention to him, and just always admired the way that he just looked at step by step all the time, and all the stories that have come out about, you know, Grays and Zenyatta and all those things. That's kind of the way I like to do things. If things weren't right, then you just put yourself into the horse's mind and looked at the world through their eyes. And I think John did a lot of that.
You know, I'll give you one. I think, Greg, I think I may have come up with one where you might have watched the race together at Santa Anita when you won the La Brea with Teresa Mack. He was probably still with Brian Mayberry with If You Could See Me Now, who was fourth to you that day.
Yeah, I believe it was pretty muddy that day, wasn't it? I can't remember, but I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, sloppy. Absolutely. Look at you. Track was sloppy.
Yeah, it was pretty sloppy, and P. Val rode the horse that day, I think.
He did. He absolutely did. That was for the Harrises. That was for Harris Farm.
Yeah, there's another that we just lost.
That's right. That's right.
In the past month or two. So, yeah, we've lost a really good guy. And, you know, I wish that there were a lot more John Sheriffs around. It'd be great for the game. He took, like I say, the patience, and not only that, the know-how, looking, like I say, through the horse's eyes at what's going on. Those are all things that some people, they just don't stop and do that anymore because, as in the world we live in, everybody's in a big hurry anymore.
Greg Gilchrist joining us, and of course, trainer of the incredible Lost in the Fog. And are we going to see you at OBS in a few weeks?
Well, I've been removed now for quite a while, and I was still doing some buying and selling, but I've kind of got out of that too. But I still keep my eye on the races a lot, Steve.
Well, it just occurs to me that you might have enjoyed a trip over to Sicily, where Parada has dropped anchor for the winter. If you want to make a trip to Italy before the,
I have to tell you, I never left anything in Italy I wanted to go back for too bad, Steve. So I probably.
Oh, wow, yeah. Even Parada, even your man John.
Well, we could probably talk about that.
Greg Gilchrist, everybody. Greg, thanks for this. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I appreciate you having me on. You do a great job, man.
Thank you. Greg Gilchrist, everybody. And, Greg's had he made a great reference, making the most with what you have. And Gilchrist, over 1,500 wins. And what he did with Lost in the Fog. Honestly, those are some of my favorite. I think back to that period, and I was just kind of tying on actually with the show, and 2000, right, 2005 and 2006, and Lost in the Fog was as exciting a horse as, honestly, I obviously very different from what Zenyatta did, but in his own way, an incredible star. Won his first the dozen races, and you want to talk about an athlete performing under difficult circumstances. Had a tumor growing inside of him the size of a basketball when they discovered it, and kept trying. Even under these circumstances, nice to talk to Greg Gilchrist. Brian Beach will close out the morning as we appreciate John Sheriffs. There'll be some other. We'll hear from more. Mike Smith tomorrow. Mike's traveling right now, so he couldn't join us today. But Brian, you've distinction in terms of the last call, winner. Thanks for joining us this morning to pay tribute to John.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, unfortunate circumstances, but yeah, his last winner was the stakes winner, Westwood and the San Pasquale, and that was important to him. And you know, he was very thrilled with the entire situation and looking forward to the Santa Anita handicap. And anyway, it all kind of tied into the whole circumstance of me finding out that he was not feeling well, because I just got over to the barn, I believe it was Saturday of last week, to hand out some stakes checks to the people associated with exercise rider Amy and the groom and so forth. And Amy said, well, you just missed John. He's on his way to Florida. And anyway, so then just a few days later, he was back, and I saw him and said, hey, man, that was a quick trip. And he goes, well, you know, sometimes, you know, when you're flying private, you can do that. And he, you know, he's flying with Lee Searing on his private plane. And anyway, so we were talking about, he was telling me that he wasn't feeling good. And, you know, so he wasn't sure if he was catching some sort of a bug or something. And I said, well, maybe it's that quick trip you took back and forth. You know, you got a little jet lag. And he says, I don't think so. Something else. Something's coming, he said. And you know, that was the last words I had with him, unfortunately. And it was really a shock to hear, you know, a day later, basically, that he was gone. But he was an outstanding man, outstanding trainer. And I think one thing, you know, I listened to a little bit of your show earlier, Steve, and everybody has, you know, some great recollections about John. But I want to pass along one thing that he did for me and my wife. My wife, Lotta, she was an exercise rider, and she worked for John for a while. And anyway, later on, after we came back from the East Coast and she went back to work back here in California, she was working for another trainer and got injured and was in the hospital. And John, you know, just checked on her every day with me. And we were sort of frustrated because the people over at Huntington in Pasadena weren't really getting any diagnosis, a firm diagnosis on what was going on with her. She was having a lot of neurological problems. And John brought up, he says, you know, I brought up the fact that UCLA had the best movement disorder team on the West Coast, and I needed to get her, you know, to someone like that. And he says, well, just let me call Jerry Moss. He's a huge donor at UCLA, and I'm sure we could get something done. And so that's what happened. Mr. Moss made a call to one of his doctor friends at UCLA, Ronald Reagan, and he admitted her over there. We got her switched over there. The movement disorder team at UCLA figured it out right away and set us on the path to, you know, recovery. And I mean, she's still dealing with some issues to this day, but it was all because of John. And that was the kind of stuff that John, you know, would do for anyone on the racetrack. He was always trying to help, you know, with even things outside of the realm of the horse and the, you know, the daily goings on at the racetrack.
You know, that's you hear stories like that virtually everywhere, and you know, it's the kind of Brian, that's the kind of reflection that there's always people like that at where you go in the game that you know, look out. That's one of the qualities of the racetrack. Everybody looks out for each other, and you know, Jay Privman earlier talking about you know, when Jay was dealing with his cancer, the thoughtfulness and you know, the going the extra, in this case, the extra mile too, for for you and Lotta. Beside Kaz, over the years, who else did you win races with John?
Well, just about every jockey I ever had, he was really good that way with me. He always, he liked the more experienced jockeys. He wasn't too interested in the real young apprentices and that kind of thing. But obviously I had Julie Crone, and we rode a lot for him. Victor Espinoza, and Gormley, Express Train, a few like that. But just about everybody I had, and he also would, even if he wasn't riding my jockeys, he would call me, almost on a daily basis on entry days about certain things and ask me to enter his horses for him and find him riders. He didn't like having to call up 6 different agents to find a rider for a race. He would call me a lot and have me do that for him, or give him suggestions on who he should ride on this horse or that horse. And so we had a lot of interactions that way. One of the kind of thing just came to my mind, a little bit of the degrees of separation, I guess you could say, with we also lost Jim Cassidy recently.
Right.
And my wife also worked for Jim Cassidy, and Jim, his last post on his Facebook page was a picture of my wife on Evening Jewel back at Churchill Downs before the Breeders' Cup. And he made kind of a little comment about, look at the riders, what she's wearing. Well, she was wearing a jersey that they had given away, at Hollywood Park. And so that was, she was working for John at the time as Zenyatta. She didn't, she wasn't the rider for Zenyatta. That was Steve. But so that was, we were all connected in some way or other. And, you asking about my riders, Julie won a stakes race for John on Yankee Gentleman at Del Mar. And of course, Yankee Gentleman was the broodmare sire of the dam of American Pharaoh, who, we rode with Victor. And so there was a lot of connections with John in a lot of different ways for me on the track. And, he's going to be greatly missed. I don't think there was probably a day that went by in the last, 25 years or so of the racetrack here in Southern California, that if I saw him, we didn't have some sort of conversation, whether it was on the side of the quarter chute or back at his barn after training. It was he was always wanting to show me a new gadget that he had or a new app that he was using, and he was quite an interesting person, and he was interesting. He was older, right? He was 80, but he was not like most of the older generation.
No.
He was very interested in new technology and whatever the latest thing was. He always, had it on his phone, or he had it, he was using it on his laptop, or his, he would do his chart, on his computer, and he was interested in the latest horse diagnostics that he could put on his phone to, detect heat maybe in a horse's leg, or, take videos of the horse's gait and then have it analyzed. And he was just always, every day, trying to learn more.
Brian Beach, everybody. Brian, I appreciate it. And going to be one of those people that you'll be looking for at Clocker's Corner. And as Steve Anderson said, in that spot against the fence on the path from the barns down to Clocker's Corner, that's where so many times I'd lean there and talk to him, and it's going to be just impossible to replace. So thank you.
Sure, and I appreciate it very much for having me on to speak about John. Thank you, Steve.
Not at all. Not at all. Brian Beach, everybody. And we'll see Brian when we get to Santa Anita for Derby. Not far off. We're going to save the Zenyatta call for tomorrow when Mike Smith is with us. And so we'll send you out into this Wednesday race day. I want to thank everybody that joined us this morning with their appreciations, their homage to John Sheriff, Steve Haskin, Lenny Shulman, Summer Mayberry, Jay Privman, Ron Anderson, Jay Hovde, Steve Anderson, Mac McBride, Greg Gilchrist, and Brian Beach. Thanks to our Brian Dorenzo. Back with you tomorrow here in Rosemary Beach, Florida. And we'll talk to Mike Smith, and we'll also kind of ease back into horse talk and some celebrations of what we enjoy most. But we all enjoyed John and just are going to miss him terribly. Replay tomorrow, 6-9 here on Sirius XM. Archive podcast after some post-production. Talk to you in the morning. Thanks, everybody.
With Steve Byk on Sirius XM Radio.
Who you betting on? How about an app created specifically for horse racing? Naira Bets. We specialize in thundering hooves, fist pumping, and boosting your bankroll with robust weekly promotions, and offer betting tips from actual horse racing experts. Bet all day and night, nationwide. Get the action and thrill of horse racing with Naira Bets. $200 deposit match with promo 200. Visit NairaBets.com for details.
Horsepower, Virginia's economy, creating over 38,000 good, fulfilling jobs every year. Think about the farmers, the farriers, the feeders, the athletes, trainers, drivers, and jockeys, caretakers and landscapers, investors and interns, veterinarians, restaurant owners, restaurant workers, tour guides, trail guides, equine therapists, and so many more. Now that's horsepower. Virginia's economy wins with horses.
The Pennsylvania breeding program is the best program in the country. The stallion awards, the owner bonuses, also the restricted races and the stakes races for Pennsylvania breaks. Last year, 321 Pennsylvania breeders earned breeders awards. 22 Pennsylvania breeders earned over $100,000. We have the best program in the country. Take advantage of the fantastic program that we have. Learn more at pabred.com.
Nothing compares to a horse. They inspire greatness, command respect. Because Virginia's horse industry isn't just racing and farming. It's built on the skills, labors, and passions of dedicated people working in every industry throughout our state. Horses fuel the economy, create jobs, support thousands of families, and even make dreams come true. Virginia's economy wins with horses. Find out more at virginiahorseracing.com.